The cabin stood alone, way down, flattened into endless grass, its back pressed to a slow, winding river that reflected the sky like a blade of pale steel. Wind combed through the prairie in long sighs, bending the yellow grass as if the earth itself were breathing. No road led directly to the place anymore. The old track had faded years ago, swallowed by time and neglect, leaving only memory to guide a man there. Ethan Cole had not planned to stop. He had ridden since dawn, dust caked on his boots and the hem of his coat, the sun riding his back like a silent judge. His horse slowed on its own when the cabin came into view, ears twitching, nostrils flaring as if sensing something unsettled in the air. Ethan tightened the reins, frowning. No smoke from the chimney, no cattle nearby, yet the door was closed. Someone was there. He dismounted slowly, hand resting near his belt, not on the gun, but close enough to matter. The prairie had taught him caution. Men didn't survive long out here without it. Neither did women. Neither did anyone who trusted appearances. As he stepped closer, the sound reached him. A faint movement inside would creaking under a careful footstep. Ethan stopped 3 paces from the door. "Whoever you are," he said, voice calm but carrying. "You're a long way from town." Silence answered him. Then, after a breath that felt too long, the door opened just enough for a sliver of shadow to break into daylight. A woman stood there, not a woman he expected. She was native, young but not fragile, her dark hair braided neatly, a single feather woven near the end. Her clothing was traditional, carefully stitched, worn but clean, not ceremonial, not costume but lived in. A faint bruise darkened her upper arm, half hidden, and a thin cut marked her shoulder, already healing. Her eyes met his, wide but steady. She raised one hand to her mouth, not in fear alone, but in instinct, as if holding in words she did not know if she should release. For a moment, neither of them moved. The river whispered behind the cabin, and the wind carried the smell of water and grass, and something older, something unsettled. Ethan had faced gunmen without blinking. This moment made his chest tighten. "You alone?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded once. He glanced past her, catching only darkness inside. "This place abandoned?" Another pause, then quietly it was. Her English was careful, learned rather than native, but clear. Ethan studied her, not rudely, but with the trained eye of a man who knew how trouble dressed itself. She was not starving, not desperate, but she was hiding. That much was plain as the cut on her shoulder. "This land belongs to no one," he said, "but it's not safe." A flicker crossed her face, something like bitter understanding. "It is safer than where I came from." That answer told him more than a long explanation ever could. He stepped back half a pace, easing the tension. "I'm not here to trouble you." Her eyes didn't leave his. "Men say that." Fair enough, he thought. "My name's Ethan," he said. "I ride cattle south of here. I didn't know anyone was using this cabin." She studied him again, this time longer. The way she looked at him wasn't fearful. It was measuring. After a moment, she said, "I am Ayana." The name settled into the space between them like a promise and a warning all at once. Ethan nodded. "You're hurt." Her hand dropped instinctively to her arm. "It will heal." "Though here," he said gently, "a small wound's turned big." She didn't argue. That too told him something. The wind shifted, carrying distant thunder, though the sky above remained clear. Storms brewed far away, unseen until they arrived. The frontier worked the same way. "I can leave," he said. "If you want." Ayana looked past him toward the endless open land, then back at the river, then finally at the man standing before her, tall, weather-worn, eyes carrying. "Ununu," she said softly. "You may stay a moment." That single sentence changed everything, though neither of them knew it yet. Ethan removed his hat more out of respect than comfort and held it against his side. "You running from something?" She met his gaze fully now. "Aren't we all?" He almost smiled. Almost. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of old wood and riva damp. Ayana kept distance between them, positioning herself near the doorway, Neva fully turning her back. Ethan noticed every movement, every careful step. She had learned survival the hard way. "You alone in the world?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "Oh no, but the world is not kind to my people." He didn't contradict her. He'd seen burned camps, broken treaties, graves with no names. Before he could speak again, the house outside snotted sharply. Both of them froze. Ayana's eyes widened, feet flashing sharp and sudden. "How many ride with you?" she whispered. Just me," Ethan said, instantly alert. He stepped toward the door, listening. From far, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of hooves, more than one. Ethan's jaw tightened. That was when he understood. She wasn't just hiding. She was being hunted. And by choosing to stop at this forgotten cabin, by standing in that doorway and speaking his name, he had stepped directly into the path of something darker than a chance meeting. Outside, the prairie swallowed sound as well as secrets. Ethan reached for his hat, settling it back onto his head. "Looks like," he said quietly, "we about to find out what kind of trouble you brought with you." Ayana straightened, fiodening into resolve. "What kind of man you are," she replied. The river flowed on, indifferent. The frontier had begun to close around them. The sound of hooves came again, clearer now. Not close yet, but close enough to matter. Ethan stepped out of the cabin first, slow and deliberate, as though he had nothing to hide and no reason to fear the open land. He scanned the horizon, eyes narrowing against the glare. The prairie stretched wide and deceptively empty, grass rippling like water under the wind. But he had lived long enough out here to know emptiness was a lie. Behind him, Ayana stood just inside the doorway, her body tense, breath shallow. She watched his back with an intensity that came from knowing what happened when men chose wrong. "How many?" she whispered. Ethan listened again, counted the rhythm, measured the spacing. "3," he said, "and maybe 4. Her fingers curled into the edge of the doorframe. "They should not have found me." "Men who are paid enough usually do," he replied. She flinched at the word paid. Ethan turned slightly, keeping one eye on the horizon. "You want to tell me who they are?" Ayana hesitated. The wind tugged at her braids, lifting loose strands around her face. "They are not my people," she said. "They ride with papers and rifles. They say they have the law." Ethan's jaw tightened. Lawmen didn't usually track a lone woman to an abandoned cabin miles from nowhere, and bounty hunters liked to call themselves law whenever it suited them. "What do they want from you?" Her voice dropped. "I escaped." That was all she said. It was enough. The hooves crested a low rise now, the riders finally visible, dark shapes moving against the pale grass. 3 men, spread just wide enough to be cautious, rifles slung across their backs. They rode like men who expected trouble but believed they could handle it. Ethan exhaled slowly. "You got family nearby?" he asked. "No. Have you got somewhere safe?" She shook her head. The riders slowed, spotting the horse tied near the cabin. One of them raised a hand, signaling the others. They angled toward the riverside, trying to box the place in. Smart enough to be dangerous. Ethan turned to face Ayana fully now. "Listen to me carefully. Whatever they think you did, they don't get to decide your fate out here." Her eyes searched his face. "You do not know what I have done." He met her gaze without blinking. "I know what they'll do to you if they take you." That truth hung between them, heavy and undeniable. The riders stopped 50 yards out. One of them dismounted, tall, broad-shouldered, coat cut fine enough to suggest money. He removed his hat and wiped his brow like a man taking his time. "Well now," he called out, voice smooth as oil. I didn't expect company. Ethan stepped forward, planting himself squarely between the men and the cabin. "This land's empty," Ethan said. "You're trespassing." The man smiled thinly. "We're looking for a runaway." His eyes flicked toward the doorway. Ayana stiffened. "She's under federal writ," the man continued. "Stole government property. Belongs in custody." Ethan laughed once, humorless. "The people don't belong to the government." The man's smile faded. "Careful, rancher. You don't know what you're stepping into." Ethan rested his hand casually near his belt. "I know men who chase women across open land usually aren't the good kind." One of the riders behind him spat into the dirt. Another shifted his rifle. The leader sighed, "A last chance. Step aside." Ethan didn't move. Behind him, Ayana closed her eyes briefly, not in surrender, but in resolve. When she opened them, something had changed. She stepped forward, standing just behind Ethan's shoulder. "I'll not go with you," she said clearly. The leader's eyes hardened. "You don't have a choice." Ethan felt the moment snap tight, like a rope drawn too far. He moved first. The sound of the gunshot cracked across the prairie, scattering birds from the river reeds. One rider screamed as he fell, clutching his shoulder. "I learned their language better than they thought." She lifted her chin. "I heard them speak of moving us farther west, of selling what we left behind." "And you ran," Ethan said. No, she corrected. "I burned the papers." The firelight flickered across her face, catching the strength there, the fear shaped into resolve. "They caught me before dawn," she went on. "They beat me, said I would be an example. She touched her shoulder unconsciously, but the building burned fast. In the smoke, I escaped. Ethan exhaled slowly. That's why they hunt you. Yes, he noted once. That makes sense. She frowned slightly. You do not judge me. I judge men who put chains on others, he said, and not the ones who break them. For the first time, something like relief crossed her face. Brief, fragile. You saved me today, she said. Ethan shook his head. You saved yourself. I just got in the way. They shared a quiet moment then. Not comfort, not peace, but understanding. The kind that came when two people stood on the same side of a line drawn by violence. The night deepened. They slept in shifts. Ethan first, sitting with his back to the tree, rifle across his knees. When he woke, Ayanna was already watching the dock, alert as any scout he'd even known. Just before dawn, the sound returned. Hooves. Far off but unmistakable. Ethan cursed under his breath. They're good. Oh, they will not stop, Ayanna said. If they return me, others will fear to resist. Ethan stood, stretching stiff muscles. Then we don't give them the chance. Oh, where will we go? She asked. He looked north where the land rose into broken hills and stone. Uday is a trading post 2 days from his. After that, mountains, hard country. She nodded. Parcher keeps secrets. They moved fast now, leaving the river behind, climbing into terrain where Hazi's slowed and men made mistakes. By midday, the sun beat down hard and Ayanna stumbled once, catching herself before she fell. Ethan was at her side instantly. You're hurt. She shook her head, stubborn. I can walk. He studied her, then did something unexpected. He took her hand. Not roughly, not possessively. Just enough to steady her. She stiffened for half a heartbeat, then allowed it. They walked like that for a long time. By afternoon, they reached a narrow pass where the wind funneled through stone, carrying sound in strange ways. Ethan halted abruptly, pulling her back. What? She whispered. He pointed. Below them in the dust were tracks, booted men moving fast. They circled, Ethan muttered. Trying to cut us off. Ayanna's eyes hardened. Then we make them chase shadow. She led him then, slipping into a narrow ravine only a local would notice, moving with the land rather than against it. Ethan followed, impressed despite himself. Near sunset, they reached a high shelf overlooking the plains. From there, they could see the riders below, confused, arguing, spreading out again. For the first time since the cabin burned, Ethan smiled. They've lost us, he said. Not forever, Ayanna replied. No, he agreed, but long enough. They sat on the stone as the sun sank, the sky bleeding red and gold. Ethan removed his hat, resting it beside him. When this is over, he said quietly, you don't have to keep running. She looked at him then, truly looked. Neither do you. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust. Below them, the frontier stretched endless and unforgiving. Ahead of them lay choices neither could undo. And somewhere behind them, men with rifles vowed not to let the woman who burned the papers disappear into legend. They reached the trading post at dusk on the second day. It sat crouched at the edge of the hills like an animal that had learned not to trust the open land. Low buildings of weathered timber, a corral half fallen, wagons clustered as if for protection. Smoke curled lazily from one chimney. Lanterns glowed dimly, already lit against the coming dark. Inside the main hall, the smell of sweat, whiskey, and dust wrapped around them. Men turned. Conversations dipped, then resumed. A few eyes lingered too long. Ethan felt it immediately. The shift in the room. Someone recognized him, or recognized trouble. They took a table near the wall. A server brought stew without being asked. That too told Ethan something. Ayanna barely touched her food. Her eyes kept moving, counting exits, watching hands. You have been here before, she said softly. Once, Ethan replied. A long time ago? Something bad? He met her eyes. Something I survived. A man rose from the bar then, heavy-set, beard shot with gray. He smiled like an old friend who remembered debts. Ethan Cole, he called. Didn't think I'd see you breathing again. Ethan's jaw tightened. Evening, Jonah. Jonas ambled over, gaze flicking briefly to Ayanna before returning to Ethan. You bringin' trouble or just passing through? Passing through, Ethan said. Jonas chuckled. A funny thing about that. Men came through earlier, asked questions. Offered coin. Ayanna went still. Ethan leaned back in his chair. What kind of men? Jonas mimed a rifle with his hand. The kind who don't like being told nort. Silence settled thick between them. I told them I didn't know nothing, Jonas continued. But information's a trade like any other. Ethan stood slowly. The room quieted again. You sell her, Ethan said calmly, and you won't live long enough to spend it. Jonas's smile faded. You always were dramatic. That was when the door burst open. Gunfire cracked inside the post. Men shouted. Glass shattered. Panic ripped through the room. "They're here," Ayanna whispered. Ethan grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward the back as bullets tore into the walls. Someone screamed. Jonas dove for cover, cursing. They burst out into the corral, night exploding around them. 3 riders charged in from the west, firing wild. Ethan dragged Ayanna behind a wagon, returning fire with controlled precision. 1 rider fell, another veered off, but more were coming. Ethan knew then what he had avoided admitting since the river. "They won't stop," he said. "Not while I'm with you." Ayanna stared at him. "What do you mean?" He took a breath that felt like tearing something loose inside. "I didn't tell you who I was." "Tell me now," she said. "My name was on those papers once," Ethan said. "I used to ride with men like them. Cleared land. Moved people." His voice dropped. "I quit when I saw what we were really doing." Ayanna searched his face for lies, for weakness. "Found neither. That's why they recognized you," she said. "Yes." Another bullet struck the wagon inches from Ethan's head. "They want me," he continued. "I turned myself in. They stop hunting you." Her grip tightened on his sleeve. "No, it's the only way." She shook her head fiercely. "You saved me. I will not trade your life for mine." Ethan cupped her face briefly, gently. "You already changed things. Burning those papers mattered." "So do you," she said. He smiled then, not soft but sure. "That's why this works." He shoved his rifle into her hands. "Go east. Follow the ravine. Don't stop." "I will come back," she said. He shook his head. "You live." For a heartbeat, they stood there as the world burned around them. Then Ayanna did the bravest thing of all. She obeyed. She ran into the dark as Ethan stepped out from cover, hands raised, voice carrying across the chaos. "I'm Ethan Cole," he shouted. "You want me. Come take me." The shooting stopped. The men turned, and the frontier held its breath. The silence after Ethan's surrender felt heavier than gunfire. Lantern lights swung as men emerged from the dark, rifles leveled, boots crunching slow and deliberate against the dirt. Their leader, same broad-shouldered man from the prairie, studied Ethan with open satisfaction. "Well," he said, voice smooth as a knife's edge. "Look what crawled back." Ethan didn't lower his hands. "Let the woman go." The man smiled wider. "Already did. You're the prize." They moved in, rough hands binding Ethan's wrists with iron cuffs, the cold bite of metal sealing his choice. Someone struck him across the ribs for good measure. He grunted but didn't fall. From the edge of the corral, Jonas watched, eyes darting. He said nothing. They dragged Ethan to a post and chained him there as the night wore on. Questions came, names, routes, accomplices. Ethan answered none. Each silence earned him blood. Each blow bought Ayanna more distance. At dawn, they loaded him onto a wagon. Ayanna ran until her lungs burned and the world narrowed to the sound of her own breath. She followed the ravine east as Ethan had said, slipping between stone and scrub, moving like water where the land broke. By noon, she stopped beneath a stand of juniper and forced herself to think. Running would keep her alive, for a while. Living would require more. She turned north.
They held Ethan in a timber pen near a river crossing. Temporary, brutal, efficient. He counted days by the light and nights by the pain.
The men grew careless, convinced the hunt was over. It was on the 4th night that the wind changed. A scream cut the dark, not human, but close enough to pull men from their beds. Then another. Horses reared. Shots rang out. Ethan smiled through split lips. The pen door burst open. Smoke poured in, sharp and choking. Ayanna stood there, eyes hard as flint, face streaked with ash. She carried a rifle like she'd been born with it. "A move," she said. He didn't ask how. He didn't ask who helped. He moved. They ran together, cutting through confusion and flame, disappearing into the trees as the camp collapsed behind them. By dawn, they stood on a ridge overlooking the crossing. Smoke rose thin and accusing. "They'll come," Ethan said. "Yes," Ayanna replied. "But not today," she turned to him. "The papers were not the end," he nodded. "Then we finish it." They walked on as the sun climbed, 2 figures against an unforgiving land, no longer running, not yet free, but together.